Greetings, families. Welcome back once again. I hope you are well. I hope your day is good. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. This video you are about to watch on news is a debate about the ex-president of Burkina Faso, ex-president DAMIBA. The assassination brought the coup and the extradition of him from Togo to Burkina Faso. Yes, it's in Burkina Faso now. Why people are talking about this particular, because there were a lot of coups that has happened before 1 week is gone. But this particular one, it has ruffled a lot of people, especially the president of Cote d'Ivoire. I didn't know that. I only came across video that I worked on 4 days ago. I don't know why I still haven't shared it. In short, if you are like me and you don't know what was going on in the Sahara maybe 3-4 years ago before our leaders, this debate will explain a lot of things to you, or you will learn a lot from it. I must tell you in advance, this video I've translated it from French to English. Work on it before sharing it with you. So if you like something like this, please sit down comfortably and listen to this debate, and hopefully you understand what is going on more, and it will not be story that somebody will tell you. I'll be back, families. Thank you for your time.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. A major question. The main topic this week, the extradition of Paul-Henri Sandaga Damiba. As you know, the former head of state is mentioned in almost all destabilization plots targeting Burkina Faso, the most recent of which was foiled on January 3, 2026. One more destabilization attempt, certainly one too many, which prompted the request from the Burkina Faso judicial authorities to the Togolese authorities. After reviewing the validity of the request, the Togolese judicial authorities responded to it, as required by law. Paul-Henri Sandaga Damiba will be apprehended on January 16th and handed over to the Burkina Faso authorities on January 17th, according to the statement from the Togolese authorities. Paul-Henri Sandaga Damiba extradited, the subject is making headlines in both national and international news, all throughout the week. And we are discussing it this evening in our segment. Joining us tonight are Ibrahim Traore, Development Engineer. Good evening. Good evening.
Greetings, families. Welcome back once again. I hope you are well. I hope your day is good. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. This news, as you can tell, is an interaction, is opinion sharing. You heard the introduction already. A lot of questions has been asked. A lot of YouTubers are talking about it. Everyone is giving their opinions. But these opinions is coming from specialists, lawyers, journalists, those who have been following the Sahel news, so they know more than what I will tell you, or some other person will narrate a story for you. It's worth to listen to them. Families, grab a cup of tea, wine, coffee, water, sit down comfortably, because it's 1 hour. I'll be back.
Madam.
Dr. Bukari Nebi, teacher researcher, is with us. Good evening. Good evening, madam. Major Samuel Guitenga, lawyer, is also with us. And finally, Imhotep Ayala, coordinator of the movement 2 Hours for Us, 2 Hours for Kamita. Good evening to everyone, and thank you for accepting RTB's invitation. So, Paul-Henri Sandaga Damiba extradited. The topic has been widely discussed, as I mentioned. Would you say that it was more than time for this extradition, given the repeated involvement of this man in destabilization plots against Burkina? I'll start with you, dear Bernard Nimbega.
Thank you, Madam. Given indeed the context, and the context you alluded to, namely the number of destabilization attempts in which his name is repeatedly mentioned, and among, in fact, the main people responsible. Considering, in fact, that we are currently experiencing one of the most serious crises in our country, and taking into account the fact that we have now reached a stage where we can say that recovery has begun, it is truly pitiful. It is very disappointing to hear that someone who was once at the top of the state, who indeed promised and even swore to lead, is involved. This country toward better days is now found to be plotting every day, by God's will, while he was allowed to leave through negotiations under conditions that I would say were ideal for someone who committed all those mistakes here. In such a context, we are left thirsty. We are thirsty to learn. We are eager to listen. We are eager to know what the motivations truly are behind all these actions. And also to find out where and how they operated, with whom, so that we can diffuse the situation. And to be able to move faster, indeed, in the fight. I truly believe that in terms of our people's expectations today, when you read everywhere, when you listen, you can clearly see that for the most part, the people are satisfied. Now, there may be differences of opinion on other points, and we will see that later. But for now, I think there is a consensus on the fact that he has returned to the country. And really, who would be against such an extradition? That someone comes back to their country through judicial means and has the opportunity to explain themselves so that we can learn. We can disagree and then have different opinions later on about how it was done, but it's not really about the fact that the person has returned to their country. So,
Maitre Gitanga, it must be said that the former head of state, Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, violated the rules of his exile status to now be extradited to Burkina.
Thank you, Nadam. So perhaps you should allow me first to comment on what is meant by extradition. Perhaps, often legal language can be confusing. In French, it's easy. I would even say simple. It simply means the act of one state handing over a person to another state, a person who is wanted either to be prosecuted, to be tried, or to serve a sentence. That is what is meant by extradition. In this particular case, I believe that the judicial authorities of Burkina Faso submitted a request to their Togolese counterparts, who responded favorably to the request and proceeded with the extradition, which involved handing over the person in question, namely Damiba, Paul-Henri, to the Burkinabe judicial authorities, and the investigation process is therefore ongoing. I think that when you look at the statement from the Minister of Justice, you get an idea of the number of offenses the person in question is being accused of. And by virtue of the judicial cooperation that exists, whether at the international, regional, or even bilateral level, extradition can indeed be applied when the offenses for which we are being prosecuted are provided for by law.
We will come back to this a bit later during the debate. In the meantime, Doctor, we've also seen that the news has been very heated regarding this extradition. We've even seen a certain agitation beyond our borders. How do you interpret this agitation?
Thank you very much, Madame Sanu Koulibaly. Thank you. That was very well pronounced. Yes, I think it was about 2 weeks ago. Specifically, on Sunday, January 11th, during this same program, we discussed the case of Damiba, but he had not yet been extradited. And that day, we pointed out that if what is being said is true, that is that Togo, and in fact, as we have seen since then, Togo being one of our neighboring countries, truly makes things easier for us. In our pursuit of sovereignty, it would not have been understandable that at the same time, given all that Mr. Damiba has been accused of, Togo would refuse to hand him over to the Burkinabe authorities, who would then make him available to the justice system. Burkinabe, so that we can fully understand what Mr. Damiba is accusing Burkina Faso of. I want to emphasize this point. Because when you look at the disastrous plot that was underway, it wasn't just against Captain Ibrahim Traore as an individual, even though the head of state in himself is an institution. It wasn't against the MPSRD regime either. It was a plot against Burkina Faso. And for someone who has had the privilege of holding the highest office as head of state, this is incomprehensible, and he needs to explain himself. This is high treason. Indeed, on the 17th, he was extradited. And this is to the credit of the Togolese people, first of all. But we must also commend our diplomacy, because in this context, managing to bring Damiba back to Burkina Faso to answer for the charges against him, diplomacy certainly played a fundamental role in this. To return to the question itself, namely the various agitations we see beyond Burkina Faso, I would simply like us to take a look, to map out, to create a profile of all those who are getting worked up about this. Let's draw up a profile. Whether they are Burkinabés who have lost their way today, who have broken ties with the nation because they chose to do so themselves, or whether they are non-Burkinabés, when you look, the profile of all these people today, not only had he already stated that there was no reason for Togo to extradite Mr. DAMIBA, and when Togo extradited DAMIBA, they went into an indescribable frenzy. This agitation can be explained by the fact that these are people who want to see Burkina Faso brought to its knees. And for them, Mr. DAMIBA was a champion, someone through whom misfortune would befall Burkina Faso. And they were very convinced of that. Today, now that their prayers have not been answered, that DAMIBA has been extradited to Burkina Faso, they're pulling out all the stops, once again, to claim that Togo is an obstacle to the rules. But let's mention a few cases. When you look as well, most of these people, as I said, are from the Ivory Coast. I have deep respect for the Ivorian people. I myself have a part of me there. For media outlets whose only editorial line is hatred against the AES states, and specifically against Burkina Faso, who come to spew insults. As if what is happening today with DAMIBA were the first time in the history of Africa or the world, and even as if this were something foreign to Ivory Coast itself. When there was a post-electoral crisis in Ivory Coast in 2011, and Mr. Laurent Gbagbo was removed from power, and Mr. Alassane Ouattara was installed in power, what we call the pro-Gbagbo supporters found themselves in neighboring countries. And between these countries and Ivory Coast, the same text that this commentator or mercenary is reciting today exists. But that didn't stop Blue Goudet, Charles, from being extradited from Ghana to Ivory Coast in direct violation of the very same text he's talking about. That didn't stop Lida Kwasi Moise, then Minister of Defense under Laurent Gbagbo, from being extradited from Togo to Ivory Coast. And Minister Ahmed Coulibaly, may he rest in peace, at the time said that there were texts that exist between Togo and Ivory Coast, which specifically allowed Lida Kwasi Moise to be in Togo. But those same texts also require the person received in Togo to observe the duty of discretion, which Lida Kwasi Moise did not do. Those are Ahmed Coulibaly's words. And so it was normal that he was extradited to Ivory Coast. That Mr. Dami in Togo observed the duty of discretion. Then it's not just that he failed in his duty of discretion, he even has a plan to destabilize his own country. And you say that Togo should not extradite him. I believe that Togo is a responsible state, and Togo does not need to take lessons from anyone. The last example. For example, there's the case of the Beninese journalist, Mr. Komlan, who left Benin and is in Togo as a refugee, and who was invited by the Ministry of Communication in Côte d'Ivoire. It was an entire ministry that invited him to Côte d'Ivoire for a panel discussion. And the government spokesperson, a minister, mentioned about 47 guests at that event. And he goes to Côte d'Ivoire from Togo, is arrested in Côte d'Ivoire, and extradited to Benin in blatant violation of his refugee status in Togo. When the question is put to the Ivorian government spokesperson minister, he says that when they arrested him, they didn't bother to find out whether he was a refugee in Togo. You see how serious it is at the highest level of the state. That means they can just take you, like a chicken without an owner, and then they send you off, roast you like grilled chicken, and eat you. And this isn't the only example. We see the case of the Malian MP who was transiting through Côte d'Ivoire on his way to another destination. He was arrested at the airport and held for several months. He was just tried and sentenced to 5 years in prison without parole. I believe that today we have no lessons to learn from this opportunist who, as I said, spouts nonsense in the media, once again, whose only editorial line is hatred against Burkina Faso. So,
Imhotep Bayala, before we continue, what is your take on this extradition? And wasn't it about time?
Yes, I think we couldn't have hoped for a better way to start the year 2026. It's the best gift that God and the spirits of our ancestors could give us. You know, at the start of every year, you really have to begin it with a lot of energy, with a lot of hope. And I think that's what nature intended. The Burkinabe people have embarked on a turning point full of hope, full of light and dignity. If we have not already been elevated to the highest summit of international dignity, when we recall that historic march of April 30th, international, the Black community around the world. And that includes countries that are on bad terms with the countries of the AEUS. When you see the number of French people who marched in Paris, the English, the Swiss, the Americans, those who marched in Japan to demand that he be protected, the hero, the Black Messiah, Comrade President Ibrahim Traore, I think we cannot reduce all of this today to something trivial. The whole world is now intently observing this critical turning point, and when it is carefully compared with the previous historical attempts at total elimination, the coup d'etat, which is a means to achieve other ends, namely to kill, and to kill on a large scale, to provoke a widespread massacre, of what is considered a symbol of hope and rebirth. The current president, our esteemed comrade President Ibrahim Traore, is frequently likened to the powerful image of the resurrection or the spiritual reincarnation of Thomas Sankara, who remains a truly visionary and universal figure for all. The tragic and untimely loss of Thomas Sankara has undoubtedly cost the whole of humanity a great deal in terms of progress and hope. Are we going to allow the same tragedy to happen again to his political and spiritual son, who today is taking action in so many different ways? The first is the reclaiming of territory. The second is development initiatives. And when you see reports today that show that after the launch of a highway, work is going on intensely, day and night. You see factories opening, and you compare the number of unemployed people that existed before with the number now absorbed by these new initiatives. Should the Burkinabe people have aspired to anything other than a sudden halt? Here and now, for all those who are waiting for its stability, for its hopes. Between the hope that is taking shape again, these major development projects underway, these visionary paths being laid out, it's hard to fully understand why the Burkinabe people want so much. To DAMIBA, the champion of a destabilisation of which he is a worker within the inner circle. The main instigator is not DAMIBA. He is just a tool. And I say that in the chain of actors, he is the coordinator of the workers, Pouchies. And he has his bosses way above him. For me, that's exactly it. A step-by-step victory, but it's not the end of the story when it comes to future destabilisation projects. It's certainly to tell us that we've achieved a great victory, but let's keep this victory as a way to grow. Let our vigilance grow, let us increase our attention and salute our National Intelligence Service. All the security and defense forces, but also the popular intelligence provided by the people, made it possible to reach this level. I think it was, in a way, a huge shock for the Burkinabe people on January 3rd. To realize once again that DAMIBA does not give up his favorite sport, which is destabilisation. And in almost every project, as you mentioned in your introduction, he can't. To be identified an act of destabilisation, an attack on state security with a crowning moment, a sort of series that consists of killing the head of state as the main act, where DAMIBA's name is not explicitly mentioned. And what if what was being prepared on January 3rd had actually been carried out? A historic date. To link it to the dignity that DAMIBA wanted to connect to in dignity, to link it to the honor that DAMIBA wanted to tie to dishonor on January 3rd, it is the blood and sweat of our people who have rejected the same practices as DAMIBA. He implemented them during his rule and now wants to bring them back again as head of state. What we can remember is that DAMIBA himself had a dream. It wasn't just a few Burkinabe who wanted DAMIBA to return to his country. He himself said during an interview with Alain Foucault that one of his greatest dreams was to come back to his homeland. In the end, he did return, not as president, but as a prisoner, at least while we wait for the judicial findings to clarify the situation.
You're right to bring that up.
Thank you so much for listening up to this stage. It's a question. Is this attempt, is it the tiny one that we have seen? And instead of us concentrating on this one, there will be another one. We know there will be more, but there was a comment that it always is at the back of my mind, even though we know that they will never stop. But that comment says that this is just a test. And please listen. One of our brothers is also mentioning the same thing. So this man, they will hold him. We should not be in hurry. We should wait till they take everything out of him. Well, if they would do it Cuba style, I'll come back with that. Please listen.
Maitre Gitenga, DAMIBA is here. Were the proper procedures followed regarding extradition, especially considering that international law prohibits extraditing an exile for political reasons?
So maybe we should start where you left off. Is it for political reasons? It is my firm belief that when it comes to the matters of international extradition and comprehensive judicial cooperation, there are a vast array of established conventions and legal treaties in place that allow sovereign states to effectively help each other to apprehend and prosecute those individuals who stand formally accused of committing serious criminal offenses so that they could be held accountable for their actions. And in this particular case, I believe the request was made as soon as the investigating judge was seized by the prosecutor, and the request then followed the diplomatic channel, because it goes through the Ministry of Justice to reach the level of the Togolese Judicial Authority. In Togo, there is also a procedure that is followed, because in reality, the Court of Appeal in Togo issued a ruling in which precisely the Court of Appeal gives its opinion, in accordance with the extradition request to allow the Togolese judicial authorities to respond to the request that was submitted by the other party. As with other countries, there are conventions. For example, the Convention on the Suppression of Organized International Crimes. These are conventions that exist. Conventions against corruption, and conventions on judicial cooperation. These are conventions that exist and that specifically allow for extradition requests when someone is accused of committing offenses. And when I read the minister's statement to see which offenses the investigating judge had identified, I didn't see any political offense. That's why I said if there is a political motive, I have no knowledge of it. But for now, based on what we've been able to hear, and it must be said when a case is under investigation, we can only communicate what is allowed to be communicated. This is only the beginning. Maybe we're overreacting a lot, but we still don't know much yet. Maybe this is just the tip of the iceberg, the visible part that we can see. Mr. Nadine Bega, please respond.
Actually, we'll leave the legal questions to the specialists and then talk about the legal aspect and legal policy. And as for legal policy, he alluded to that. He was saying that there are indeed conventions. Burkina Faso is no longer part of ECOWAS, and it's actually ECOWAS regulations that are being applied. He should actually have been sent to an ECOWAS country. In fact, this is total incompetence. And here, I'm talking about judicial policy. At this level, what is it about? What is the question? Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and other countries actually know. Members of Sahel countries, such as Mauritania and Chad, are part of what is called in English WACAP. And what is WACAP? It's the West African Central Authority of Prosecutors. It's a network. In fact, in French, it's the network of West African prosecutors who have signed this agreement. Not under the auspices of ECOWAS, but indeed under the auspices of the United Nations, and specifically the United Nations office that deals with drugs and crime, at a level higher than ECOWAS. And so it uses instruments such as the Convention of ECOWAS, but now not in the case of ECOWAS. So actually, when I hear people say we should thank Togo, I think that's an insult. We don't thank Togo. we congratulate Togo for truly upholding the principle of law. Because indeed, when you analyze, you will see that both countries made sure to strictly respect the principles of law, at least at the political level. Let's take one example. You know, and I think the legal expert won't contradict me, there is a rule. And it is stated, indeed, its name. It's in Latin, so those who understand Latin will have to bear with it. I'm being a bit harsh on it. Out, like when we say the month of August. There you go. Dedera out judicari. Who means what in French? In French, it effectively means you extradite or you judge. So if you see in some countries where people keep, preserve, but do not judge, it is they who should blame themselves for not actually being within the law. And when you hear people saying that he should have been extradited, and also specifically in Côte d'Ivoire or in another country, well, you immediately understand that they are the ones encouraging the violation of international legal principles. Because if, for one reason or another, Togo decided not to send him, not to extradite him, they would have to judge him. But since it is an obligation. Now, we also need to add something, since we were indeed talking about the reasons, the strikes that he was accused of. In fact, regarding the strikes he is accused of, people really need to once again acknowledge, first, the choice to pursue judicial proceedings, but also the respect shown at every stage, both in Burkina Faso and in Togo, for the procedure. Why am I saying this? At the level of Burkina Faso, in fact, the prosecutor was approached through what is called a denunciation. Okay, and what did the denunciation say? Since these are legal matters, we need to read it so we don't actually miss anything. What was the denunciation? Preparatory acts threatening the security of the state, embezzlement of public funds, incitement to commit offenses, money laundering, and of capital. You take that into account, and I actually want two things, plus one more point. What are the two things? Open a judicial investigation. What's the second tier? I want to be sure that you are indeed making an extradition request. And thirdly, he tells them that there are indeed international damages which must be relied upon. These steps must indeed be based on that, and that's exactly what we just talked about. And then the investigating judge, in turn, what does he do? What does he do? He officially opens the judicial investigation. When opening the judicial investigation, what is it for? He now says, okay, there are criminal embezzlements, because he is now authorized to make that determination. He confirms that there are indeed criminal embezzlements of public funds, criminal illicit enrichment and corruption, and then incitement to commit offenses and crimes, aggravated concealment, money laundering, and then a plot to destabilize, including a plan to assassinate Captain Ibrahim Traore. All of this goes to Togo. Togo, as the lawyer clearly explained, refused everything according to all legal procedures and excludes.
Precisely. Togo only focused on ordinary criminal offenses.
Of the whole case. They considered everything except for the plot to destabilize, including the assassination of the head of state. Although, if you actually look at the agreements I'm talking about, what is simply excluded are certain things. For example, discrimination if it's based on race, religion, etc. And then if it's political or military, etc. But the assassination of the head of state is included. But since here it's actually an attempt, maybe that's the reason. So that means they confirm this. But it's also important to clarify one thing. And again, there's a rule. The rule of specialty. And what does the rule of specialty say? The rule of specialty says, because people are wondering, yes, when he comes, will it actually be the case? If other charges are found during the investigation, can they be added? It's tricky, but it's possible if you actually rely on the rule of specialty. Now, let me clarify the rule of specialty. The rule of specialty states that prosecution must be limited to the charges that were approved at the time of extradition. But as there is always an exception, the country can submit another request to Togo. As there's always an exception, the country can make another request to Togo. And if Togo approves, it gets at him. That's what I wanted to clarify.
Thank you so much, families, for listening and watching. Yes, there is more that we need to learn from this man. Why he's so bitter? Why is he doing what he's doing? And all the time his name will come up. And now that they got him, some country leaders says, and no, they're going to be a burden on our president, Captain Ibrahim Traore. I said our president, we know it's a government issue, but at the end of the day, he's the head and he's the one they want to eliminate at all costs. Is he going to be there and be sending messages or code words as they have been sending in their messages? According to this speech or this interruption, they have a lot of messages that they will go through, that they are sifting through to get all the truth. And also, as they have him, he needs to talk. I'll be back.
Can we say that DAMIBA had become a bit of a burden for his host country, given his actions? It seems that Togo even questioned him.
Yes, in any case, I must admit that having a guest or visitor as unruly as DAMIBA is not desirable in any family, by any family. All of us have stayed with guardians to grow up. People still stay with families today. It's customary to welcome a visitor. And in the collective African socio-cultural imagination, the visitor or foreigner is always seen as a messenger from God. Except that DAMIBA seems to have been sent by the other side. And especially when you look at it, it's still uncomfortable for Togo to realize that with every attempted coup d'etat, or with every attempt to end corruption or to distribute money, like an automatic trigger, an ATM, we realize that there is a note present on our territory that is always associated with all of it. The fake coups, all the false attempts, everything that doesn't conform to proper standards. Unfortunately, that rate is always mentioned in connection with it. I think that, in a way, Togo was led, I think it was during the Kindos attempt, where there was even, unfortunately, that tragedy in Barcelogo, which cost the lives of more than 300 people who paid the price directly. Because, once again, at that stage, DAMIBA was still mentioned as being in collusion with the Kindas, who went beyond a simple desire for political settlement to ally themselves with terrorist forces. But it's unimaginable. This is the height of the most unimaginable abominations. Togo, which is currently suffering from terrorist incursions, realizes that we have another territory capable of colluding for political purposes to achieve its objectives. I think that at this stage, there was already something serious going on. And I believe it was either right before or right after this that the Togolese authorities, feeling uncomfortable, were forced to raise awareness among their foreign nationals by telling them that while certain freedoms are not denied, the freedom to create and organize crimes, to plan actions that threaten the state security of other countries, is not one of them. To associate with terrorist groups, truly, we cannot guarantee you that right. Moreover, the right of exile does not permit this kind of activity. And I think that's why the regulations in this area have been established as such. That I wouldn't say that the political opinions of the exile are completely forbidden. But unfortunately, DAMIBA doesn't stop there. He repeated it, he did it again. And I also think that, in a way, Togo needed this assurance, this reassurance from the Burkina Faso authorities, so that they could feel completely at ease, both judicially and ethically and morally, because it's not always easy. For someone who has fled to come seeking refuge, to find shelter and protection with you, and then to hand them over, no matter the pretext, even as a mediator.
I was playing in the subregion.
Obviously, we know the key role that a major role to play in saving the mercenaries, the 49 Ivorian soldiers. We also know the role he played in many other crises to facilitate political rapprochement, including within the Ivorian crisis itself. Laurent Gbagbo and the Alassane Dramane Ouattara camp. I admit that Togo took quite some time before endorsing the grievances of the Burkina Faso intelligence or justice, It was surely to convince themselves that DAMIBA was reasonable. But they forgot about the incestuous, selfish interests with which DAMIBA was allied, interests that are self-serving. Above reason, which could no longer help DAMIBA to be reasonable. These are interests that even placed him above national interests. From that moment on, DAMIBA became death. He could no longer pick up on anything. But actually, I think there's a popular saying that common sense is the best shared thing in the world. But we have to admit that DAMIBA did not live up to this principle. But in the end, did Togo really have to, in the name of the initial facts presented by the Burkina Faso side, betray its own oath to provide safety to someone who fled under such circumstances? And then, under the umbrella of mediators, I think Togo made tremendous efforts to reason with Mr. DAMIBA. But, as I mentioned earlier, he was already beyond all reason. January 3rd was a strategic and educational tool for the Burkinabe side, to compile even more facts, to build a stronger case, and above all, to obtain confessions. I think the fact that the media, including RTB exclusively, broadcast these confessions, I believe that in some way it was also to put the Togolese state at ease. Because at that point, it was no longer an open secret, it was no longer state secrets being shared between states. The Togolese public is made a witness, and so this public would not come to accuse its state of having betrayed an oath. Because this public was also a witness to the confessions, as were all entities, from the central government to the general population. Everyone was put at ease, and I think that Togo simply carried out, as the legal expert said, everything under the cover of all the chapters regarding extradition. I believe that all of this was respected. Burkina Faso, contrary to Western imperialist propaganda, which claims that we are not a state governed by the rule of law, has just delivered a perfect rebuttal to this Masonic propaganda to show that. We are now more than ever allies of the law, and that is why this case was brought before the courts. We bore our hardship with patience and waited until January 12th before asking the Togolese side to make a decision. On the 16th, the Togolese side duly received Mr. DAMIBA to ascertain the facts, and ultimately acknowledged the consistent nature of the charges against DAMIBA. And it is on this basis that the process continues. So the process of bringing human rights issues before the courts, I think this criticism can be made of France. It can be made of Donald Trump, the international Yankee who threatens to attack the whole world, but it can no longer be made of the countries of the Sahel.
So, Doctor, from a political standpoint, couldn't this extradition also be seen as Togo asserting itself as a concrete step in embracing its closer ties with the AES countries, and especially with Burkina Faso?
Yes, it can be interpreted that way, meaning that Togo, and I think I hinted at this earlier, Togo is fully asserting itself. And through this action, and especially, as Bayala mentioned earlier, especially given the evidence that was certainly provided to the Togolese state, Togo did not want to become an accomplice, nor did it want to serve as a rear base, to destabilize. A country like Burkina Faso, which is a close country and one with whom they have very good relations. So indeed, by doing this, it reinforces the position that Togo is a great country, an ally in the fight against terrorism, but also in the broader AES project, namely achieving full sovereignty. I also want to say, as Bayala mentioned earlier, that there is this imperialist propaganda being spread by the media. A media outlet, or rather a lying media, as Captain Ibrahim Traore calls it, which tries to portray Burkina Faso as an exceptional case, a country without freedom of expression, where there are no rights. Let's take a leap back in history. On September 19th, 1989, Jean-Baptiste Boukari Lengani and Henri Zongo were accused of attempting a coup d'etat. The two I just mentioned were part of the group. The four leaders of the August 1983 revolution, Thomas Sankara, Blaise Compaoré, Boukari Lengani, Henri Zongo. Blaise Compaoré had Thomas Sankara assassinated on October 15, 1987. 2 years later, in 1989, on September 19th, Commander Bukari Lengani and Henri Zongo were accused of attempting a coup d'etat. In a single night, the night of September 18th to 19th, they were accused in just one night. They were tried in a single night. They were executed by fire.
They were accused in one night, tried in one night, and executed. For those from Garungos. So the citizens and people of Burkina Faso woke up and discovered on the early morning of the 19th that during the dark hours of the night, there were two specific individuals who had desperately tried to stage a military coup d'etat against the state. They were arrested, tried, confessed, and then executed. That's what happened here in Burkina Faso. If we were not a state governed by the rule of law, if Captain Ibrahim Traore were the person that the media portray him as, and also the misguided children of Burkina who get excited, who boast abroad, saying, no, don't send Damiba, we'll execute him, and so on. If we were in that kind of mindset, Damiba would have been executed a long time ago, since he's been here since the 17th. Those who testified would have been executed a long time ago as well. They testified, they confessed. And you see how recently it's according to the media as we followed, that is, it was chanted, wasn't it? Who would be? Who went on a reconnaissance mission to a supposed residence of Captain Ibrahim Traore, and who makes videos to certainly send to terrorists. We're in Burkina Faso. If Captain Ibrahim Traore were a ruthless monster, as claimed by the imperialists and their lackeys, all these people would have been executed a long time ago. So that means we are a state governed by the rule of law. And I also agree with that, Miba. I'm knocking on wood with Bayala. Damiba is not the mastermind. Now, because all the testimonies we've heard so far actually tend to make people believe that Damiba is the mastermind. And so we shouldn't go beyond Damiba. Nah, that's not true. Bayala said it. Damiba himself is just a worker, a poor worker, who in reality doesn't even know what he's involved in. It's like those cults. You think you're the guru, but there's a guru above you. So we need to dig deeper. And as someone said this week, he doesn't even understand why they're sending Damiba. In any case, people think they've said it all, but they haven't. And Damiba has a lot to say. He needs to be grilled. He needs to be shaken up. And Damiba certainly is not Dingaré. If he was mute, he will speak, and he will tell us about all the connections he had with the forces of evil, both from neighboring states and those far from us, who definitely wanted to put an end to our revolution. And what plan does Damiba have for Burkina Faso? Someone who says, who can live without power. Is that a social project? And yet you find fools who follow this man. Someone told me this week, I went to a public office and someone came there and said, no, the captains, they have to go. It's true, they're working, but they didn't come through elections, so it's taking too long. You see, madam, that was terrible. For Burkinabés who think like that, does it mean you absolutely have to come to power through rigged elections to truly care about your people? What Captain Ibrahim Traore has done in 3 years. Haven't we had regimes in Burkina that came to power through elections and didn't accomplish this even after 2 terms? They exist. So today, let's focus instead on what is being implemented by the Burkinabe state, by the Burkinabe government, and let's support these authorities. Because whatever people may say, what is being done today is to the honor of the Burkinabe people. There was a time when they didn't even feel proud to say they were Burkinabe, when Burkinabés had become the laughingstock of the world. But today, one of the advantages, one of the dividends of Captain Ibrahim Traore coming to power, it's precisely this dignity we have, or rather, this pride we feel in saying we are Burkinabe. And you don't realize it. You're a journalist, you travel. When you go to an airport, an international airport, and someone approaches you when you're Burkinabe and says, please protect your president. Can we really, as Burkinabe, with our roots entirely in Burkina Faso, want to stage a coup against that man? Then
we'll make progress. So, Maitre Gitenga, Togo still made sure to secure guarantees, notably the right to life and a fair trial for Damiba. How should we interpret these guarantees? What does it imply?
What needs to be said is that in Burkina, there is a code of criminal procedure. It is in accordance with the provisions of this code of criminal procedure that the investigating judge made the request. In Burkina, there is also a penal code that defines offenses and the corresponding penalties. And in Burkina, there are also judges. We all agree that it was a magistrate who made the request for Mr. DAMIBA's extradition. And this is not the first time an extradition request has been made in Burkina. There have always been such requests, and there always will be. What needs to be said is that the commission of an offense, regardless of the field or nature, can give rise to an extradition request, provided that the conventions governing such requests are not violated. So in this particular case, I can say that in Togo, there's a code of criminal procedure. In Togo, there is a judicial authority. In Togo, there is the indictment chamber, which issued its ruling to provide an opinion to the Togolese judicial authorities, who responded to a request made by the Burkina Faso judicial authorities. I believe that if the intention was not to apply the law, was it really necessary to make requests based on the provisions of the Code of Criminal Procedure? Well, that's the question. So for me, at the very moment when the request is based on the national provisions of both countries and on the international conventions binding the two countries, I think we are still operating within the law.
Criminal acts, embezzlement of public funds, illicit criminal enrichment, corruption, incitement to commit offenses and crimes, aggravated concealment, money laundering. These are, among others, the charges brought against DAMIBA. So, Maître, I'll stay with you. Can these charges change depending on how the judicial case develops?
In a legal proceeding, as Mr. said, Namebek. In legal proceedings, we like to say that the judge is seized of the facts, that these are the charges against him. Perhaps the findings will turn out to be even more significant. That's why I think we need to give the investigating judge time to do his job. There is a time for the investigation, and when the time comes to communicate the details, perhaps we will be better informed. So,
Doctor, do you think that the guarantees requested by Togo are justified and legitimate before the extradition?
Yes, but as I was saying earlier, there are always legal texts that we rely on. And so Togo as well, in view of its legal framework, certainly did not want to extradite DAMIBA. That way, no one could later say that Togo did not respect its own laws. So on this point, as he said, the indictment chamber of the Togolese state ruled and considered that the facts, at least as presented by the judicial authorities from Burkina Faso, were serious enough, were sufficiently substantiated for DAMIBA to be extradited to Burkina Faso. But they also noted that the Burkinabe state emphasized the fact that they would not, in short, impose the death penalty. And it would not be applied. I think that's part of the statement from the Togolese government, the one broadcast on Togolese national television, which we watched. Yes, DAMIBA is here, Sir. Things are moving forward. Things are progressing. But as Maître said earlier, there is the investigation period. It's during this investigation period there are new facts emerging, which perhaps were not known at the time when DAMIBA was extradited. And still, these require that the position of the Burkinabe state also evolves. But the position can change. And then we shouldn't forget, but maybe the Burkinabe state said, yes, it won't happen, but the judge can. It's the judge's decision. Because it's not the Burkinabe state that will tell the judge, no, we don't want the death penalty to be applied to Mr. DAMIBA. If the judge deems it appropriate, the judge can hand down that sentence. And then the Burkinabe state can say something else afterward, like commuting it to another sentence. These are really just hypotheses. DAMIBA has not yet entrotted. We're still just talking about hypotheses. So everything is evolving. It depends on the context, and we need to give the justice system time to do its work.
In the meantime, what lessons can we draw from this? First, for the exiles regarding this extradition, I'm addressing you, mister. Dendega.
First, before actually getting to the lessons we can draw, we have to acknowledge that we chose to go the judicial route. And when we talk about the guarantees supposedly required by Togo, Togo is not demanding any guarantees. As I said, we shouldn't use that word to say that guarantees are being demanded. Coming from Togo, that bothers me. Because Togo and Burkina Faso simply respected together a conventions, and legal rules that already exist. Now, it's up to each country to assess and comply according to its own judicial framework. And we can actually leave that to the legal specialists to handle. Now, there are still two things we can say. There is a principle that is generally accepted, which is that the law should not be retroactive. And at the time it was being examined, we reviewed it and we did not approve the sentence of. Our country did not actually have the death penalty in its legal system. This actually means that here, it's important to note that this is not a requirement imposed by Togo. It's simply a framework that Burkina will, to some extent, be required to respect. And it's the respect for, it's all these principles that will, in fact, provide lessons to the world and to ourselves that we will learn from. And one of the first lessons is that since Burkina has taken legal action on the matter, it fundamentally discourages the commission of such acts through legal means. Indeed, the most effective one. I was going to say thank you. Legal-wise. Isn't that right? Because today, wherever you are, you know very well that they can come after you and that there is a system in place. A legal framework that allows them to come after you. And then there's another factor involved. There are economic crimes that are being mentioned. And by prosecuting economic crimes, we might have the chance, I'm not getting ahead of myself, we might have the chance. Thank you. For money circulation networks to be revealed. And from that point on, let's leave it at that for now. The judges, once again, may say, but we might actually have the chance for this person to be prosecuted. And that will help us make significant progress in the fight against terrorism. Because what we want today is indeed to move forward in the fight against terrorism and to quickly achieve peace and fully recover all of our territory. The other important lesson we learn is the end of impunity. That is to say, there were people who truly believed that it was enough to just go to Togo, enough to go to Côte d'Ivoire, enough to go somewhere else. If today there are authorities in certain states who, for reasons other than the law, are indeed giving a nod to, they are indeed hesitating to protect certain people. But when things actually change, because time, she is indeed taking things into account. The people who come after will actually be able to cooperate to uphold the law properly. And those people will be. So it's actually better, so it will work against impunity. And then there is the effectiveness of judicial cooperation between states, even those that are not actually members of ECOWAS. People might sit down and say, yes, we are going to go to a country that is not actually part of ECOWAS. And from the moment you go to a country that is part of ECOWAS, you are protected. No, today they will understand that this is not actually a protection. And finally, I think this can actually create more cohesion, more understanding, more questioning of the non-arbitrarily and systematically against the system. Because today, there are some who are against the RPP because they have doubts, because they say to themselves, yes, the law is not being respected. Today, that argument no longer holds water. And today, what they hear and what the judgments I want to make public will actually allow us to hear, or once publicized, will actually allow us to hear, will help bring a good number of these people back to the RPP. And I think that's what it is. It's all of these lessons together that will help this country. For citizens to get along better, to understand each other better, to realize that when we say DAMIBA, DAMIBA, it's not just words. It's truly, as Dr. Nevier just said, someone who had no plan for this country. Someone who wasn't just attacking the president, someone who wasn't just attacking the MPSR, but really listened to what was said in the meantime. Me, what I can't do is live without power. No, is it that I can't live without power? That's one thing. Secondly, it's shoot and then run away. And then there really are people who are going to come down, mercenaries who are going to come down. And it's starting to come out. I suppose it's not true yet, but I'm eager to hear the verdict. Power. He says that the equipment that is being bought, the military equipment we have, is equipment that is beyond our capabilities and the level of Burkina Faso. As soon as he takes power, it must indeed be sold to a neighboring country, to one of the neighboring countries. Then take a portion to actually pay the terrorist bandits who will have accompanied him. And that's a plan for the country, that is. So,
Major Gitenga, from a legal standpoint, what lessons can be drawn from this extradition?
Well, before getting to the lesson, if you don't mind, I'd like to provide some details regarding the conventions in question. You see, we have the United Nations Convention on what is called the Fight Against Transnational Organized Crime. Its Article 16 deals with extradition. Its Article 18 deals with mutual legal assistance. It states that mutual legal assistance must be as broad as possible to enable cooperation between states, so that prosecutions and judgments can be effective when offenses are committed. You also have the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, which came into force in 2005, and whose Article 46 also deals with mutual legal assistance and extradition. This is to say that the legal provisions being applied are there, and anyone who wants to check can do so. These are conventions that can be downloaded from the internet. You can all check to see what is stated in them and what has been done. I believe that if the judge made use of them, it was in accordance with the law. And alongside that, there are now national laws, such as the Kenebe Code of Criminal Procedure, which has addressed the issue thoroughly, and the Togolese Code of Criminal Procedure, which has also dealt with it. You know, the texts are practically the same, except that they are national laws. But if you look at the content, there isn't much difference. So what lesson can we draw? In reality, when an offense is committed, there's no such thing as a minor offense whose commission deserves to be encouraged. An offense is an offense. An offense is a violation of the law. And if the law is the will of the people, that will must be imposed on everyone. If you break the law, then the law sanctions should apply to you. That's how it works. You can't claim that your status puts you above the law. You can't say that this offense doesn't deserve to be punished. Every time an offense is defined by law, every time that offense is committed, we simply need to ensure that the law is enforced. That's all I have to say. Because in reality, prison is like a hospital, like cemeteries. That's just how it is. If you break the law, don't be surprised to end up in prison.
Thank you so much, families, for listening and watching. There was something that one of our brothers mentioned that I forgot about it in one of our president's speech 2 years ago, maybe last year as well. He mentioned that they asked him to change his clothes. They asked him to do as the former presidents were doing. If he does that, they will leave him alone. But if he doesn't, then he's on his own. And he refused to do what they asked him to do. As the three of them, you know, they can speak their mind. They don't ask permission or anything. And so, just like what happened in Cuba, are they going to continue doing it from within the country? There is more to come.
It's important to remember that the extradition and perhaps the trial of DAMIBA does not mean the end of conspiracies in Burkina Faso. You touched on this earlier in your remarks.
Absolutely. I completely agree. You know, speaking from a purely personal perspective, I firmly belong to the group of individuals who are absolutely convinced, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that we truly won't be able to stop some people from targeting Captain Ibrahim Traore. For a simple reason. When Captain Ibrahim Traore came to power, if he had decided to follow in the footsteps of the existing system, he wouldn't have had any problems. In fact, he himself said it. When he came to power, there were requests made of him. They told him, if you agree to do this or that, we'll leave you alone, as they say. You can lead however you want. He didn't want to accept it. So when you don't want to be part of their system, you have to expect that at any moment, unfortunately, imperialism, let me put it that way, will unfortunately find people inside the country who will always act as traitors and who will want to act against their own country. But it is also up to not only the government, but also the people to remain vigilant, to maintain heightened awareness. Fidel Castro from Cuba, during his time in power, was the target of more than 630 coup attempts by the CIA. So that means that when you foil one coup, imperialism, being a poor student, as Thomas Sankara said, will just go home, change its clothes, and come back in a different way. So let's stay alert. And above all, let's not believe that the attempts are already behind us and rest on our laurels. Let's remain constantly vigilant. Another point, just to answer, even though the question wasn't asked, are the lessons to be learned. But the lessons to be learned here, especially for those who are abroad, who think they're very well hidden in certain countries, to the point that they think they can try anything against their country, they should know that sooner or later, they may have to face and will indeed face the justice of their own country. We are in a savanna. The captain said it. Relations between states are above those between an individual and a state. If you think you are in a state that doesn't care about the law, doesn't care about cooperation, doesn't care about the stability of its neighboring countries, and that can host you, and you do whatever you want, sooner or later, that same state will hand you over. Because once they're done exploiting you, draining you, they'll throw you away. And at that point, your justice system will catch up with you, and the Burkinabe people will make you. Well, you will have to answer to Gipu.
Imhotep, your final thoughts, especially regarding this extradition?
Yes. First of all, we need to realize that the laws currently in force in Togo are well known by the Burkinabe authorities who made their request, so that they can take them into account, so that it takes her demands into account. And I think that's why Burkina Faso's request was accepted by the Togolese side. I think the issue of the death penalty is still ongoing. It hasn't been finalized yet. So, at the current stage of the legislation in force in Burkina Faso, Togo is obliged to extradite DAMIBA because there is no death penalty. These are intentions that are still evolving. But it is also, and above all, about rejecting this scam or this outsourcing of a delinquent perceived as such, with a kind of legal accommodation, miss, sir, that they want to use against him to prevent him from being held accountable for his wrongdoings. You know, Burkina Faso even went so far as to violate its own constitution to accommodate an international delinquent like Francois Compere. Today, he is housed and sheltered in Paris. What clause exists in criminal matters? We did not extradite. The Burkinabe judicial texts were gutted to suit the needs of a delinquent recognized as such in Paris. And we even went so far as to offer our constitution to Paris, modifying it so that Paris could extradite us. Francois Compahor, was he extradited? That shows another level of analysis of the possibilities of traditions that can be based on reciprocal laws or international laws, but also on good political cooperation and good understanding. The sharing of a political vision is a foundation that accelerates and facilitates things. We must not overlook the importance of political convergence between FORT and the AES authorities, and among the AES authorities themselves. And FORT. The same demands were made by Burkina Faso, if I'm not mistaken, against the spoiled children of the Republic circulating in Abidjan, certain activists, but the Ivorian state has not extradited them to this day. We have the number two of the ANR, who is now in Abidjan with a cohort of exceptionally high-ranking defectors, but against whom
The Burkinabe state has regularly issued warrants to bring people in, but they have not been enforced to this day. The person who politically oversees the Ivorian state is at odds in terms of political vision. We stand for sovereignty, while he supports France's colonial subjugation. So, that's also a point that really deserves to be highlighted. It must be said, today DAMIBA, who has fallen, is a double mind. A mind both militarily and operationally, because he has led strategic military regions that today have become strongholds and safe havens for terrorists. But he is also an officer, even if a poor one, judging by his actions. He devised his destabilisation plan by recruiting idle women who were supposed to go raise one of their hands at the station. TSR shows that he is an amateur who even dishonors intelligence itself, which is supposed to be embodied by an officer of 130. But above all, it means that he was such a mastermind that international terrorism and mercenaries relied on him because he was involved both in the political high command and the military high command. He intervened, and today, Pandamabet, who is the main operative in the hands of Western imperialism. From these rootless drifters who wandered through the sects, bringing them back to the Burkinabe state is. The financing network has been dismantled, but it's also the entire network for planning all political plots that has been struck at its core. So the enemy forces will experience a kind of lull due to the shock and the blows they've received. Period of calm, which doesn't mean a complete stop. But the internal security intelligence agents must not rush into the second phase. Or, I don't know, the third phase, which is the hearing, the investigation. Give all the necessary time for the investigation to get DAMIBA, his phone, and all the existing devices to talk. DAMIBA is a sacred black box in the hands of the Burkinabe state. There's no need to rush. We have all the time we need. If it takes us 6 months to establish the offenses, to reclassify them, that's fine, because the investigating judge can, based on confessions made by the accused, reassess the crimes that have been committed. So, there's no need for us to panic. The main thing is that the package is on Burkinabe territory. We need to take the time to thoroughly examine the package, to conduct a sort of preliminary intelligence gathering. To be able to identify the actors we don't immediately see, but who are part of the network, because it's very well organized. He has connected the actors, the economic operators. Who would have thought? And the network includes housewives. Who would have thought that beggars aren't part of the network, that even the mentally ill aren't also recruited and made part of this process? And who can deny that government officials, students, plumbers are also actors in this? Underground players who are waiting for the second level. So, we must always allow time for education, because what threatens us is more serious than the projects currently being implemented. I think that for the stateless, some of whom have become commentators on the DGC, on international radio stations that they have managed, institutions like the CNI in this country may begin to realize that Borabana, a film in which they participated in the making, is a thought-provoking film. To tell them that they need to come back home. We
are running out of time. The final word goes to Mr. Nadenberg.
Thank you very much. After what Imhotep said, I would just like to come back to 2 points that seem very important to me. It's the story of Dr. Nebier, who met someone and who actually told him, in fact, all those who are singing. This electoralism, in fact, tell them to always look at China. Have you ever heard of presidential elections in China? But the country is on its way to becoming the world's leading economic power. What is needed, rather, are reforms in a political organization that truly allow for the maturation, education, and guidance of citizens to reach levels where they understand this. The last thing is to say, as Imhotep said, to sum up by saying that there is the judiciary, there is the legal aspect, but in the end, there is the political. So, I think this helps to shed light on what comes next.
Thank you for your various contributions. This is the end of this episode of Major Questions. Thank you for your loyalty to this program, and thank you for your loyalty to RTB's programming. See you very soon.
Thank you so much, families. The video is long already. I will leave you. What have you learned from this video? If you have learned something or something you don't know, but you know, leave a comment, because otherwise it's waste of your time. I've learned a lot because it's just 2 years or just over 2 years since I started reacting on videos from these 3 countries. Before, I don't know anything about, because I don't speak French, so I don't understand what is going on. Why wasting my time? And how can I translate it? Because it's money as well. What do I care about them? It's only because our 3 leaders that I love so much and support what they are doing, that I'm doing this, that I'm learning every day and night. So if you are like me and you don't know anything, but you love them and you are learning, let us know under the comments. Share it. Give the video a thumbs up. There is more to come. I'll be bringing part 2 on this topic. Credit to RTB News and Faso 7. My returning families, thank you so much. My new families, thank you. Those who are passing by, thank you so much. God bless you all. Have a wonderful day. Good night to you. Good morning to you. Good midnight to you as well. Please, can they give the video thumbs up and share it as well. And I would love to read from you, and many others would love to read from you concerning this ex-president that is trying to assassinate our president and is now in the hands of the government. Should they do the unthinkable to him, what he wanted to do, or should they leave him? Should they leave him in a cell and be using Burkina Faso money to be feeding him? Should they take him to the farm also to weed? What should they do with him? Please leave your answer. I'll be back.